prayer with a short prayer. And James, if you don't mind doing that, and then Reverend Miller, if you, anything that's on your heart that you want to share after that in terms of opening comments, as a board member of pastors, I'd appreciate that, please.
Yes, sir. Thank you for the opportunity. If we could all bow for a moment of prayer. Dear Lord, we thank you for gathering. We thank you for bringing us together. We thank you for protecting and keeping us during this uncertain time. We ask now that you continue to protect and keep everyone under the sound of my voice, our families, our loved ones, our communities. And we pray that you bless the speakers assembled today, that something may be said to touch and encourage someone to continue with their project and give them the knowledge they need to see it through, to serve your people and your community. We ask these things in your precious name. Amen.
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 Reverend Miller, do you want to make any opening comments as a board member?
I appreciate everyone being here. Also, appreciate the fact that we are part of pastors. I know that there are many things that we have covered during these sessions, but pastors has a vested interest in the community. We also like people to know that we're an association just fully invested together to obey and restore and serve the community. Our focus has been on revitalization, empowerment, development, but in these times that we face today, we are interested in knowing that people have their fair share of the opportunities that are out here for our community. And to go through these processes has helped us, and I pray that it has helped the community. And serving with pastors for the last 8 years, I often remind people of the wonderful work that we have done, the opportunities that we've had, the people that we have helped. And I thank all of you for being a part of this opportunity. And those who are listening, know that this is a wonderful venture that we all can get into. We have helped many churches, many denominations. We are ecumenical. We've worked with the Methodists, United Methodists. We work with the AME. We work with the Reformed Episcopal. We work with all churches and agencies in the community, especially the minorities. And sometimes we don't get the opportunity or know-how to look into the ventures that are out here. And pastors open the door for many of us. And so I've been helped by pastors. My churches have been helped, even if it was just a conference, so that we can get on one accord. And so I ask that we pay attention, that we help others, and as we learn, that we will pass it along to others in our community. And Fred has been a wonderful resource to us, and all of you who have joined us here in these last few episodes. We continue to keep you in our hearts and our prayers. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you, Reverend Miller. I appreciate laying the groundwork and the foundation. I like the way she articulated that. And we speak about our fair share. We're really talking about access to information, access to resources. And part of my excitement for today in particular is, as much as I've been in the trenches in preparing for this conversation, Tammy Hoare-Hawkins provided some information that I didn't even know. And I said, wow, this is going to be awesome. So I need to hear some of what she's sharing as a part of the process. So I think there's whether you're a novice or whether you're experienced, I think there are different pieces that we want to provide. So getting into the nuts and bolts of it, we have Tammy Hoare-Hawkins at Community Works. I'll ask her to introduce herself when she speaks. James Chatfield, the Chief Lending Officer with South Carolina Community Loan Fund. Again, I'll ask him to introduce himself when he gets ready to speak. And Andrew Reinhardt with Synovus. I can tell you, each of them I have had the opportunity to work with in a number of different ways, both in terms of financing church projects, financing some of pastors' projects, and doing community outreach, doing education, and to get folks ready. So some really great information. To set the groundwork, you see this sort of discussion outline of where we want to go, but the last session, we had a conversation really looking at the vision of what is possible. What is possible? And we looked at we looked at all small churches, some that started off with small projects like single family rehab. We looked at a church that's looking to start with assisted living. We looked at churches who have looked at acquiring every vacant parcel around the church that's come available to them. New Israel adopted that as a strategy, that as every vacant parcel that they could acquire, that they would do that. We looked at gentrification, how they were able to get a Montessori school lease because they were able to target the demographics that are now surrounding the church, even though those demographics don't necessarily reflect the congregation itself. And we looked at office and meeting space, and even just duplexes and triplexes. So the variety of different ways of how the churches could leverage and create revenue sources to support, ranging from $20,000 to $100,000 a year of income coming in beforehand. And then the session before then that Reverend Miller referenced, we talked about how to get access to the subsidies, how to make it happen. We had the housing community development officers from different parts of the state and state housing to talk about how to get subsidies. But one of the messages that came from that is that they can't do it all. They have to leverage these resources. And that's where our conversation today comes in, is how do we leverage these resources? And then how do we learn to speak their language? We speak in terms of our faith and we speak in terms of the gospel. But when it comes to making a request and getting through underwriting, we have to know how our lenders are going to talk in order to achieve those goals. So my last comment as we jump into the meat of the material today, there are some people who have joined us directly based off of the webinar link that did not register. We are sending out handout materials to those as a follow-up and checklists and outlines as a part of this series. So if you did not specifically register through Eventbrite, I do suggest you send an email to pastorsinc@gmail.com. That's pastors with a plural, INC at gmail.com, to make sure that you get a copy of those handouts. But when we look at where we can go with this and what's the role of the faith-based community, if we want to develop our own property and leverage those assets, how do we look at partnering with other developers for a variety of resources? Maybe we might need money for actual construction. Maybe we need it, how do we get equity? Maybe the project is large enough, or there's some issues that we need multiple people coming together. We need a Synovus Bank and a community loan fund to work and participate together. And maybe we just need long-term financing for either the church itself or some of its real estate. All of those different issues on the front end. Sometimes we don't have the cash up front, so we need money to do the architectural engineering. We call that pre-development or pre-construction. So how do we go about getting those? What are those different financing options? And that's really the conversation today, is how do we look at those different financing options? So the first part or segment of this, we're going to talk about getting prepared. We're going to talk about preparation. So I'm going to ask James Chatfield to talk a little bit about what does a completed loan application package look like? What are the financial statements that are required? What are some of the basic documents that churches need to have, the things that most lenders want to see? I certainly have enjoyed my working relationship with James and Community Loan Fund. So I welcome his feedback and thoughts in terms of how we can get ready to make the ask for the money.
Yes, sir. Well, thank you so much for that, Fred, and good afternoon again, everyone. I am James Chatfield, as Fred mentioned at the top. I am the Chief Lending Officer for South Carolina Community Loan Fund. So I have the honor and privilege of working with our loan officers as they engage clients and communities across the state to make their community development projects a reality. I do want to stop, and she does not know I was going to do this, and pause and recognize Tammy Hoy Hawkins, who is our founding executive director. So without her, there would be no me or South Carolina Community Loan Fund. Thank you so much for all the groundwork you laid to make this organization possible. So, in terms of what's needed for a completed application, this is a conversation we have with our clients a good bit up front. I cannot underscore enough the importance of a completed application package. And FA has up on the screen here for you a list of documents that lenders will ask you for as you engage them in those conversations. Each lender differs slightly on what they may ask you for, but for the most part, the list that Fred has provided here is right on for you. The thing I want to underscore for you as a part of that is financials, financials, financials are going to be extremely important when you engage a lender for financing. What do I mean when I say financials? So in particular, you're going to want to focus especially on your pro forma. And pro forma is just a fancy way of saying your project budget, what you expect the project to produce in terms of financing. That's critical and that's key for us as lenders on our part. When we look at the project, we want to know, will it be able to sustain itself? Will you be able to afford essentially the debt that you're applying for? Will the project be able to pay for that? That's a key piece of what we're going to look at. Not only that, make sure when you're putting together those projections as well that they're realistic, that they're conservative. Don't give us your optimistic, bright, rainy, or bright, sunshiny day numbers. Give us your rainy day numbers, because that's how we're going to underwrite and look at that request. We're going to look at worst case scenario. Can this project afford to repay the debt? Also, you're going to want to have income statements, balance sheets, and cash flow statements as well. I know in the case of a lot of faith-based organizations, what we typically run into is not a lot of churches or nonprofit arms of churches keep track of that information closely. We don't expect you to be an accountant or a financial expert, but we would like you to surround yourself with folks that are knowledgeable in those areas. Rather, that means you engage a bookkeeper or a CPA. I would encourage you to do so and start putting together those financial statements, because we find in many cases it's not that the churches don't have that information. We know you guys keep track of what you have coming in and going out of the door. We just find folks typically need some help in synthesizing and putting together that information in a format that lenders can use in the form of those financial statements. So if you have not done so already, or if that's not a practice in which you're currently engaged, I would strongly encourage you to start looking at that, because I would venture to say Andrew and his work, Tammy and her team at Community Works are going to need those financial statements in order to make some sound, reasoned decisions on how we might find a path forward with your request. So I'll stop there, FA, unless you have any specific kind of follow-up questions you want to ask in regards to that.
No, I mean, I think that's a good foundation, and thank you. I appreciate you laying that out. One thing that did jump out to me, I know you're talking about in terms of the existing financials, but I think one specific nugget that you made me think of is tracking outcomes overall is so important to be able to tell someone sitting in your shoes how many people you serve, even if it's on the social service side and other aspects, so that you can articulate what the reach is to the community when you're talking to your lenders and colleagues about the transaction.
That's 100% correct. Keeping track of those outcomes is going to be key, because we track the outcomes as well. And one thing I neglected to mention on, as far as South Carolina Community Loan Fund, to give you a little background, we are a nonprofit lender, and we're a nonprofit community development financial institution. Essentially what a CDFI for short, for those of us that like our alphabet soup, CDFI is a mission-driven lender. So we're extremely concerned with those impacts that Fred discussed. We're charged with that mission to lend capital into areas that our commercial banking colleagues may not necessarily be able to. So that's the mission that we're charged with. And a part of the way we look at that and approach outside of the box lending, so to speak, is to look at those impacts. Those impact indicators are very important to us in the work that we do.
FA.
Yes, sir.
This is Xavier. How do you want to handle questions? You want to just wait till all presentations are done and ask questions, or how do you want to handle that?
No, if you want to unmute and ask a question, I think that's fine. Some people are putting them in the sidebar. And so if you have a specific question, let me let you ask that, then I'll ask one that's in the sidebar.
Well, let me ask this. In terms of, because I do a lot the legal work for churches in the area. And one of the common things I find is that a lot of our churches don't have their bylaws and their constitutions written or in a place where they can readily put their hands on them. And I find lenders want the lawyers to certify that the churches are following their bylaws, and the individuals that are signing on behalf of the church are authorized to do so. So I'm not sure I have a question. I just want to make sure with our lenders that when you begin the process and getting your paperwork together, and you may be doing this, but always ask for the church bylaws so you can be sure that the people that are who are claiming to be authorized on behalf of the church actually are. Because I found in many of these closings, the person that wants to come to the table, the bylaws don't authorize them to do so. So you want to make sure those are followed to avoid any problems, in the future.
Yeah, I'll jump in just right on that. I think that's a great point, Xavier. I know just recently, and I'll talk a little bit about this in just a minute, but even with this recent COVID-19, a lot of churches were applying for the Paycheck Protection Program, in which Community Works is a eligible lender for that. And to your point, a lot of our churches had to go back and do resolutions or call a board meeting or make sure that their bylaws indicated that they were allowed to take on debt, and that person in which was authorized to take on debt could do that. And so you're right, people do have to double check those documents to make sure that they're accurate.
I'll jump in here as well. I'll 100% agree with both, because I've had that come up as a private lender as well. We have to know who has the authority. We have to know who is authorized to do this, and exactly that. We use the bylaws that are adopted. We use the board meeting minutes, making sure that the board of the church, the stewardship committee, all the committees are aware and authorized of the amount that they're even asking for in addition. They go in expecting 150,000, and now it comes at 600,000. Just that extra piece as well, during the meeting minutes, authorizing this is the person that's allowed to sign the documents, but this is also what we're requesting, or no more than this amount that we're requesting. But yes, I agree totally as well.
Okay. So, Andrew, and since you hadn't spoken, that's Andrew Reinhardt with Synovus Bank, and responding there, and Tammy Hoy Hawkins responding before. And I will say this, for those who don't know me, I'm often sitting in the seat of the on-the-field quarterback, trying to coordinate between the nonprofit, the church, the owner participant, and these guys, the lenders and the Xaviers of the world that are trying to close these transactions. And I have a joke, and it's unfortunate, but I joke that as long as it takes me to put the nuts and bolts of the real estate deal together, it often takes that long to get the financials from the church and get the corporate documents. So Xavier touched on something that's very near and dear to my heart, because that often cases, and I certainly can't call names, but right now we have a live file that Andrew and I were discussing this morning, that the real estate is together. We just need the church documents. And that's just a recurring song that carries over from project to project when we talk about faith-based churches. So if we can take that one off the table, that would certainly be helpful. One other question, and I will throw this out, and maybe this might be a good transition to Tammy's introducing herself and discussing Community Works and how she plays in the area of CDFIs. But one question that I'll let James and Andrew, if you all maybe circle back and address at some point too, is question: what if you have the property, but cash or cash flow and financing is coming in on the way? And that too is another very real and recurring issue, is that sometimes we are asset rich and cash poor. And how do we pay for all of the architectural, engineering, and upfront costs that are associated with these projects beforehand? Certainly the first conversation we had with the city of Charleston and the city of Spartanburg, how they address some of those pre-development, pre-construction items, is one mechanism. But maybe I'll get the three of you all to address and incorporate that as you all give the rest of your comments today. But with that, let's hear a little bit about how Community Works plays in this and what role how they can assist the nonprofit community and our faith-based partners.
Great, thanks, FA. And I just want to say I'm so excited to be on this call. I do see a few names that I recognize. I've gotten a private message from a dear friend, Reverend King, and a couple others. Many of you may remember I was in Charleston in early 2000s and worked for the city, worked with Gianna Shaw Johnson, and actually worked with pastors. So it's great to come full circle. And of course, James mentioned starting the South Carolina Community Loan Fund, which previously was the Low Country Housing all from there. So it's always exciting to see some old friends and faces. So thanks for inviting me, FA. I'm here in Greenville now at Community Works. I was working in Spartanburg at the Northside Development Group for a while with a neighborhood redevelopment, and FA and I got reconnected. So, and now at Community Works, we also, like the South Carolina Community Loan Fund, are a community mission-based lender. Here's just some contact information that FA can share with the group in terms of following us and learning more about us directly. But if you want to just snap to the next slide, I'll kind of just share with you a little bit when it comes to not only the faith community, but also community development, just generally, not unlike the South Carolina Community Loan Fund, which is focused on leveraging capital to support community work. We're very holistic and a little bit different in our approach in that we're looking at not only affordable housing, but also community facilities loans. And so in some cases, the way we work with churches is not just with building or renovating affordable housing, but also helping to support renovations to maybe a community facility or a certain recreation center as well. But also in many cases I know in particular at one point in time, pastors was doing some stuff around micro business and incubators and creating incubators for small businesses. We work very closely in particular with minority and women-led businesses. And so we do everything from $5,000 loans to a larger $250,000 business loans. And in many cases, we get a lot of our referrals from our faith community, from community revitalization projects where they're trying to promote not only affordable housing, but also that entrepreneurship initiative. And then really the third thing area that we're focused on, and in many cases working with the congregation at churches, is we do some credit builder and second chance loans working with consumers. So just for example, we're working with St. Anthony's, a Catholic church here in Greenville, who's looking at starting an alternative to a payday lending loan. So what happens a lot of times, as you all know, in your faith community is you identify a need in a community. It could be affordable housing and trying to understand the financing associated with layering different resources. Or you might realize that a lot of your members of the church are going to small payday lenders, maybe getting into high cost debt. So we wrap around everything that we do around consumers with coaching. If you go to the next slide, in terms of our investment areas, just like with James, we're doing not as much lending in the community facilities as they are. They're much older than we are, seasoned, I should say, not old, and been around for quite a while. But we, in many cases, work together with the South Carolina Community Loan Fund and the banks. And so this is just a snapshot of the types of funding. And to FA's point around pre-development and collateral, a lot of times we're the first lender in the project. So before you go to Andrew, you might come to myself or James to get a pre-development. You see here bridge loans, initial capital. You might come to us to actually get the project started. And in many cases, we're going to be a lot more flexible. We may take collateral that's not currently associated with the church property. Maybe you have other property somewhere else. We may look at some things. We may look at, to your point, what receivables do you have? Maybe you have a grant from Gianna at the City of Charleston, but you won't get those funds. They're reimbursable funds, right? So you need our money first, and then you can reimburse us once you draw down from Gianna or one of the cities. And so our goal is to be the most flexible funding in the project. in many cases when it comes to affordable housing or community facilities as well. And then again, we do offer small business and micro enterprise lending, and we've been very active. In particular, about 70% of our portfolio are very small minority businesses, in many cases women-led. So we recognize that's a true asset building opportunity. So understanding a holistic approach to the financing needs of the church, not only from a real estate standpoint, FA and I've talked about this, but also you guys may want to get into helping, you know, some corner store grocery or some sort of initiative. And I'm sure James can talk about their healthy food initiative because they do a lot around food. But looking at those needs in the community and how can the church play a role from an entrepreneurial standpoint. Andrew mentioned briefly about, you know, just the corporate documents and some of that. I mean, I think now is the time, I think, to revisit your corporate documents. One, with COVID-19, there's technology tools you may have to use now that you didn't have to use when you host your board meetings or you host your different meetings. And so looking back at those corporate documents and making sure they're in line with using technology as a way to vote and a way to get things done. And then again, looking at entrepreneurship opportunities to meet some of the needs in the community. And then again, I think from a congregation standpoint, understanding, you know, what are some of the challenges that folks are facing, in particular during crises like this. And so is there a way the church can participate in helping people make sure that they're accessing affordable credit, right? I mean, one of the challenges is getting access to small credit can be quite expensive. And so here at Community Works, we really look at that whole holistic picture as it relates to not only the work that you're doing in the community, but overall. And then the next slide, just real quick, we do everything we do is associated with coaching. So every single loan that we get, and I know James as well does this, and unfortunately, Andrew, I know the banks have a little bit harder time, but I know your officers do this as well. But for the life of the loan, whether it's working with FA on a real estate project or if it's working with a person who just needs a small dollar loan, we have financial coaches and financial wellness that we support everyone with, because we know taking on debt is a big responsibility, and making sure that you're successful. It's in our best interest as lenders, but it's also in your best interest as well. But I'll pause there, FA, and I can talk more later about just the current crisis, but that kind of gives folks a holistic picture of our role, how we're similar to the Sacramento Community Loan Fund, but how we also take kind of this broader approach to the work you might be doing at the church.
Awesome. Thank you. Excellent perspective. And we definitely want to leave time to hear some of the COVID-19 response. But I made 3 notes in relation to Tammy's comments. One, the emphasis on now is the time to revisit corporate documents. You know, as a lawyer, I think it's good every couple of years to go back and read your core documents and see if they play in. And I just want to share a personal story. As you talk about the change in technology, Pastors Inc. Adopted several years ago changes in using electronicbill.com and some of those other items in terms of how we process. And I think maybe in the last couple of years, we might have actually written 3 paper checks. Most of the time, I think it's the annual Secretary of State's office or someone else who doesn't take electronic payments. And when we were in the midst of getting reviewed by one of the cities on our annual audit, they asked the question, we hadn't updated our policies and procedures to reflect all the new technology. Right. And so we had to stop and go back and adopt new policies. So that's very much your point on that being on point. The other thing I will say to those of you that are listening, Tammy specifically made reference to the concept or the issue about affordable credit. I will say this, Tammy, James, Andrew, myself, you have people that you can pick up the phone and ask when you're looking at transactions and you're looking at deals and people are out of structure, and just to say, does this make sense? You know, we're here as a resource, so feel free to pick up the phone and email us or call us and talk through is something reasonable, because way too many times I see our churches get involved in something that's not market-based. It doesn't, you know, that's something that you or I might look at and say that doesn't quite fit, you know, what we'd expect to see. And so having those resources to ask those questions is so important. So speaking of the time, I think, Andrew, you know, we're in this period right now where a lot of lenders, some lenders are parking on the sidelines, some lenders are trying to get deals out. Can you talk to us a little about how the current environment is changing lending? And then, the question, is this really the time to wait, or is this the time to get prepared?
Definitely. Thank you, FA. Right now is the time to start. It's not the time to wait. Looking at it, Tammy, I took a lot of notes from you, and looking at the PowerPoint that FA sent out earlier, you and I are going to have a separate phone conversation. I've got about 15 clients that I can send you right now for all the programs that you have. And this is why I love being part of this. It's you learn and you network, and it's not about us. It's about helping the client. And that's the main thing that Synovus, I really wanted to get that point across. I've been in this industry 18 years. I've worked for the big banks. But that kind of helps into going into your question. Where is Synovus in this current environment? We are still lending, plain and simple. That is, we are in a position with what happened in 2008. Everybody probably remembers TARP, and now you have to have so much money in deposit versus so much money in lending. We are in a very equitable position in our deposits. We have been very conservative in our lending. We've been very careful, not to say that we're turning down loans and not to say we're shying away loans, but saying that we look at the deal and we look at make sure everything makes sense, and we look out for your best interest with this. Synovus is doing nonprofit lending. I mean, FA and I have several deals working right now, several $100,000 deals, renovation, new construction, for faith-based and nonprofit, that we're looking at multiple areas of owner-occupied, non-owner-occupied. It does help a little bit on knowing that there are partners out there that are like Tammy, because one thing that we have tightened, if I could say something, is the working capital. Everybody is affected by COVID. And I think that was part of, Tammy, on one of your next slides, are the programs that are available right now to faith-based, because PPP was only available, from our understanding. We were only doing it if you were a 501c3, not just a nonprofit. So the EIDL was open to all faith-based. But we were only accepting if you're also a 501c3. But different programs that are in place, that I know that you're going to share, that's the important thing. And exactly what you said is, you are probably going to be the first place for a lot of the soft costs, a lot of the startups, a lot of that first engineering piece. And then we can partner together. But right now, very good terms. We are looking at a deal right now that we're not charging any origination. We try to help nonprofits, especially. I know there's a lot of banks that are out there that want a quarter point, a half point. I even know up to a full point origination. We will not charge origination. We do not. That's not a requirement. We do work with a few attorneys in my network. Xavier, you're going to be part of it as well, if we can find one in the area. But developing that relationship and helping keep the costs down, that FA and I have worked with, and just saving thousands of dollars on the back end in fees. But that's the basics of where our lending is. I mean, we're in a strong position. We just completed a merger with a bank in Florida, so we actually have a lot of money in deposits. That's why we're a little bit easier to do financing, owner-occupied, non-owner-occupied, nonprofit, where other lenders have really gotten out of the nonprofit. We're still very much in it.
And Andrew, I'd like to just say,
Yeah.
'cause we're a partner with Synovus and we have a line of credit with you guys. And I would say the other thing is getting a line of credit before you actually need a line of credit is very helpful, especially in times like this. And so, you know, being able to work with a bank that's flexible like Synovus and being able, so in some cases, we don't provide lines of credit. I don't know if James does, and we provide working lines of credit, you know, to be drawn down for small businesses and for different cash flow needs. But from a nonprofit or just a church operations standpoint, in many cases, having access to that, knowing you have access to that, and you don't have to draw down on it unless an emergency comes up, is beneficial. And I know that helped us, you know, just knowing, for example, because of COVID-19, maybe events didn't happen that you thought, you know, different grants you thought were going to come in didn't come in because of shifting priorities. That, you know, thinking about having a line of credit available to you, and you may never draw it down, you may not have to or whatever, but just I mean, what do you think, Andrew, about that? That's been something I think has been beneficial.
I 100% agree. I mean, it's better to have something and not use it versus need it and not have it. Right now, we are not doing any unsecured lines of credit because of COVID. It's just one of the areas that we pulled out because of the risk. We are doing lines of credit with collateral attached. That's not an issue, but just total unsecured, personal or commercial. That's one of the things that we have. You know, we're trying to eliminate the risk, but still trying to take care of the clients as best as possible. But I totally agree with that.
If from South Carolina Community Loan Fund standpoint, I know Tammy raised the point about the line of credit. We don't offer a line of credit at this time, but one thing is the conversation has kind of taken shape and unfolded. The point I wanted to make is in this moment of pause, so to speak, while you may have some, I won't say additional financial resources, but you may have some measure of financial resources in the bank, to underscore the point, to start getting prepared now, because the best time to borrow money is when you have some money in the bank. Because one of the things too that we'll ask you for as lenders is what's going to be your contribution to the cost of the project, or what's your skin in the game, is what we say in lender speak. So that's another point that I just wanted to raise in the midst of the working capital conversation. But I guess we'll talk about COVID-19 later. We do have something to offer along those lines that we'll be rolling out, but I'll hold that back until that time.
Okay. I will echo exactly what you just said. You know, it's right now is the time to prepare. I mean, you guys are basically taking care of everything that I was going to speak of. So I'm just echoing everything that James and Tammy are talking about. You know, right now is truly, I mean, rates are phenomenal. I don't know as far as Tammy and James, as far as what your rates are, but I'll just tell you a couple of deals that I'm working on right now that are nonprofit. Number one, the Synovus does not require guarantors on the nonprofit lending side, but to James' point, financials. And I'm going to go over that during my piece as far as what the bank actually looks for differs from what James and from what Tammy might look at. We are going to look at a little bit heavier on financials. But, you know, current rate environment for nonprofits, like I said, we already offer no origination. I got a deal recently completed. Again, I can't mention names, but we were able to get them 3.25% in this environment. So, you know, not thinking not only about the future, but one thing that I wanted to bring up is where are you currently? Think about your current debt the church has. And is it possible to think about looking at reducing debt to help with cash flow on future needs? That's something we can definitely take a look at and use the resources. Is exactly what FA said. We are here to be an advocate for you. We do coaching here at Synovus as well. We are very, very high on financial literacy and explaining, especially to faith-based, especially to understand and, putting it down, your basic numbers as a church, but how does that relate when it goes into funding? And I have a slide during my presentation that kind of breaks it down that you can do yourself even before you send it up. That kind of helps with that.
Andrew, what I'd like to do, because I want to get to that slide, I want you to talk about those specifics of so that how they can start looking and understanding. But before we do that, I want to get Tammy to touch on this and then let you respond. One question that was raised is about CRA and community investment. So Andrew, I want to come back to you and let you touch on that, because the question is, are there grants or loans associated with that? So I want to spend some time there. And then, at least for you specifically, someone asked about how far going into North Carolina. We had some folks from Charlotte on the line. We've had some folks from Greenville, North Carolina on the line. And so I want you to touch on that. But before we do that, Tammy, just in plain English, I raised the question earlier about if a church or a nonprofit has property, but they don't have cash to put that proverbial skin in the game, how do we get there? And Andrew said that you might be a resource, that Community Works might be a resource to leverage some of that upfront architectural engineering. And so I want you to touch on that. I know the last session we said that we might be able to go to your Martin Livingston's, your Gianna Shaw Johnson's, I almost said Deborah Lewis, but the community, the housing community development offices in the cities and the counties as one potential resource. But Tim, can you take a couple minutes and just talk about how do we leverage other assets in terms of getting started?
Yeah, I mean, in some cases, we'll do a pre-development loan for someone, or even an acquisition loan for someone, and it could be a church. And to your point, if you've got land, we might appraise that land or get an appraisal, or maybe you've had an appraisal and use that. It may even be a piece of property from somewhere else. We, for example, did a project up here in, it's not a church, but it's the old Judson Mill. And they're renovating that mill and doing some housing. And so we took the collateral on a separate building, and did a $500,000 pre-development loan as a 3-year loan. And the goal is that then you pay us once you get your construction financing, right? So again, and I would think that James may have similar approaches. I mean, obviously those are a little bit riskier. So we are looking at possibly what that collateral value is and things like that. Just because we're a nonprofit and we're mission-based doesn't mean we don't want to get paid back. I mean, that's a little bit of a misnomer, so I just want to put that out there. Our capital does come from investors like banks, like Synovus. They come from philanthropic investors. And so we, just like the banks, we get below market money that we are then eligible to relend out. So we owe that money to somebody. So the way that we're able to do our work is we do get grants and we do apply for other resources to do support as well. But again, I think sometimes folks think because we are nonprofit as well that we don't want to get paid back, but we do, because we want to do future projects. So we don't just want to do one church, we want to do multiple churches. So that is important. But again, we might be more flexible. We might also look at receivables, like the fact that you're getting a grant from the feds, or you're getting a grant from someone else, and that we might consider that as cash opportunities to pay us back. We may be a little bit more flexible and maybe saying interest only for a certain amount of time. So you only have to pay us interest for a certain amount of time. We may say, 6 months, no payment, and so because we are mission lenders, we sometimes have a little bit more flexibility to try to tailor, to your point, FA, from a consulting standpoint, tailor the financing to what the needs are of the project. And in all cases, we try to do that, which is why we have coaches and great experts like James that work with us to kind of try to figure out what's the best way we can approach the project. Because we are about impact. We want equitable opportunities in low-income communities. We want to see more minority businesses be successful. I mean, we're in it for for not just a profit or just to see our funds flow out and in. We really want to make a larger impact on underserved communities. And so we balance that impact with our capital decisions.
And I just want to ditto everything Tammy said by just saying amen and wave my hand.
I'll do the exact same thing.
All right, thank you. Awesome.
Yeah.
Well, as we present, one of the things that we promised in this session is we want to hear about some specific tools that lenders use to make loans. So I do want to let Andrew transition into that. And then, and as we do that, I don't want to have my mouth write a check that I can't cash, but I see that this conversation about the CRA questions. So what, from pastor's standpoint, as pastors being the entity to convene the community with the resources, what I'll look to do is get pastors to get multiple CRA officers, and I may have to lean on some social capital from Tammy, James, and Andrew to get some of the CRA officers from maybe 3 or 4 banks and just have a CRA call and have a specific session with multiple CRA officers to talk about what kind of programs and grants and loans that they have in that, and look at putting something along those lines together. So with their help, I think we can pick up the phone and get the necessary people and have a focused conversation, because there's a lot of misnomers. Just as Tammy said, that they need to get paid back, and credit is a key piece. One of the things that you'll find when we have that conversation is we have to find out who the counterpart is that has those grant resources. It may be that there's Bank XYZ, but Bank XYZ also has a separate foundation, and that's where they apply and use those resources. Wells Fargo has their separate foundation. The other, Synovus may have some resources. So we'll have a specific conversation on that, because that can be a 45-minute, hour conversation in of itself. But with that, let me, to make sure that we at least cover the ground in our time that we have here, let me bring up some criteria and let you talk a little bit about that criteria. And then also, don't forget to touch on your footprint and where you can go as it relates to North Carolina as well.
Okay, so let's talk about the footprint first. So we are a financial institution based out of Columbus, Georgia. That's where our headquarters. We are in the states of Tennessee, Georgia, Alabama, Florida, and South Carolina as far as our bank footprint. We do extend lending to a mileage point outside of our closest branch to outside states. So if you're looking at North Carolina, for instance, I personally know, because we're within side of so many miles, I actually have loans that are currently going on in Charlotte right now. If Greenville reaches into Asheville and stuff like that, it's within that certain mileage limit. The part where it kind of gets a little bit outside of the mileage limit is the Greenville, North Carolina, is a little bit too far outside, specifically for Synovus, because we have to be within so many miles of that area of our branch. But if we're talking on as far as, Charlotte, North Carolina is something we can definitely take a look at. If it's right over the border or something like that. I don't think Asheville would be out of play because of our presence in Greenville. But anything in Tennessee, Georgia, Florida, Alabama, South Carolina, any of our footprint states, it's not an issue at all. But reaching out to external areas, especially because of current market environment, that is one of our kind of hard lines, if you had to put it that way, as far as our restrictions of what we could do. Definitely once COVID comes back, it depends on this next slide where it gets into, well, if we're so far just outside of that exact mileage, how strong is the repayment? How strong is the borrowing? And this is, I shared this with FA, this is what we kind of look at for churches specifically, but we do have several criteria that we look at for nonprofits. But this is looking at specifically a church. If you wanted to say, you know, if everything fits neatly within the box, and we wanted to make sure everything was in that box, this is what that box would be. Now, in this environment, every lender is taking into effect. We know if you have one thing that's not, you know, let's just take giving units, for instance. You have 85 giving units instead of 100. Well, if everything else is fine and everything else fits, we understand that. We're trying to help, and especially because we understand the COVID, and I think James and Tammy are going to say that about their requirements as well, is, you know, we understand everybody's situation. We understand that churches are, my church is doing drive-in. We have a drive-in church where we all turn into a radio station, and it's broadcast over the radio station. We're in the parking lot. So, I mean, everybody's having to adapt. But this benchmark that before I get out, I know I'm going on a little bit, but this is prior to COVID. But this is going to be part of the packet that's emailed out that kind of gives, based on the numbers that you already know, looking at the left side under RMA ratios, you know, looking at your total debt versus your gross annual income divided by that. That's how many years it's going to take to repay your total debt. You know, we want to see, you know, less than 3 years. You know, your giving units has a huge play into it.
Andrew, can I do,
Yeah, go ahead.
I apologize. Let me just do a quick definition, because you said that giving units has a huge play and it's an important piece.
Yeah.
Let me touch on that for a minute. I promised in one of the previous sessions to address the matter of giving units, because
yes,
in order for us to be prepared as a faith-based community, when I say we need to speak the language, we as leaders within the church talk about how many members or names are on the roll. We talk about what our weekly attendance is. And we need to know those. We need to know, you know, what our total membership is, how many names are on the roll. We need to know how many people are showing up on average in a given week. But we also need to know this mythical number of giving units, and banks use that number. Correct. Nobody really gives you a definition of what does that mean, giving units.
Correct.
But, you know, if you have mama, daddy, and a child, a 3-person family, you know, you may say in the membership, that's 3 of our 300 members. But at the end of the day, when the paychecks come in and they're giving to the church, that family is going to make a contribution, whether it comes from mama or daddy. That is a giving unit. And that's the way that the people sitting in Andrew's seat look at it, is not just what's your total membership, but, you know, are those 5 seniors, or are 3 of those mother, father, and son as one giving unit, and then 2 other giving units. And so being able to understand those difference in numbers becomes important to sell your story with the bank. So yes. I just want to kind of make sure we gave that definition, because I promised to give that definition, and we just need to make sure we can speak the terms of what you all are speaking.
Sure. And I thank you for, because I was going to get to that, but I would also say this is, you know, one of the other slides that I did send to you is a religious organization questionnaire that if you do have a specific group that is a youth group, maybe the youth group does a separate giving. Consider that when you do fill out the paperwork for lenders, if you know that that particular, and I'm just using youth group, does a separate donation, that all goes into your operating budget. They need to be counted as a giving unit, even though their family is a giving unit as well. So when you talk about membership, you talk about giving units, look at the total congregation as a whole, and that's part of the religious questionnaire that we have, is it breaks down the demographics of the church. And it breaks down who is your, and that might be on another slide. I didn't know if you were able to get to that, FA. Not that one. It was one of the PDFs that I sent.
I did not. I apologize.
Okay. Well, it'll be part of the packet, but part of the packet will describe, what are the demographics, who are your top members that give, what is their annual contribution that gives. If you have, I just saw from Doris, church auxiliaries. That is one thing, definitely. If you have auxiliary groups that have their own accounts and that goes towards specific functions of the church debt, yes, that counts as well. And that's something that I think Tammy and James would both say we do need to have it's part of that complete picture. When you're filling out the paperwork for the lenders, if we know about, you have an operating budget, but you already have a capital campaign set aside, we need to know about that capital campaign. If you already have grants that you've applied for and you're looking for, X, Y, to do X, Y, and Z, but you've already been approved for some of those grants, when you come to one of us, we need to know what grants you've already applied for and which ones that have already been approved, because that funds goes into your cash flow. Even though it's not current cash flow that you've already received, we already know on the lending side, okay, you have a $100,000 grant that's going to be used as purposes of repaying the loan. That helps the overall cash flow when it comes to the numbers. But just taking a look at that specifically, and then the PDFs that I shared that FA is going to share as part of the packet. If you have further specifics, my contact information is going to be shared. FA has that as well. But if you have specific questions, that's what we're here for. We're here to be a resource for everybody. This is just the basic example of kind of what I sent. James started off with this. What are the articles of organization? What are the church bylaws? Who is authorized to sign for the loan? To have that up front is a must. We don't want somebody to come in that has no authority. We have to make sure the board of the church, stewardship board, whoever is responsible for the budget of the church, we need to have meeting minutes stating, yes, the church group has agreed to apply for up to X amount of dollars. The purpose of that is X, Y, and Z. And we're not going to do a loan for, I'm just going to use a hypothetical purpose and say we need $800,000 to, the source and use is to refinance current debt and remodel existing debt. Oh, but all of a sudden now we need this money that's not attached to that. We need to know sources and uses up front to know exactly where everything is going as part of the package. So that way we know where the money is going to be allocated. The bank on our end, I'm not sure, and Tammy and James can jump in, but when we do our lending, especially during COVID, sources and usage is huge. If we're allocating money for a specific purpose and it's for, let's just say, construction, remodel, rehab, new construction, we're actually going to send an inspection during the construction process, and we're going to require for draws to be done, and those draws need to be on, the inspector is going to have a draw schedule and say, well, X amount of work has been done, we can fund this amount of the project because X amount of work has been done. that's something that we can't have, and that's where it ties back into Tammy might have, and that's why Tammy might be a great resource to start with, or even during the process. But it's having that information up front and knowing that information up front, so that way we may be able to come together from the beginning instead of having, well, okay, we forgot about this. And always, I cannot stress this enough, if it's construction of any type, overcalculate. It's always going to be more than what you think it is. It's better to overcalculate, and then we can adjust the loan size before, prior to closing, down without any issue. It's when we have to adjust up that we have to do underwriting again, we have to do cash flow analysis again, and it just takes a lot more time versus we do the loan for 500,000. Oh, well, we only need 4 because of X, Y, and Z, and that still gives us a cushion. That's just a simple change, and it doesn't affect cash flow. So, I mean, that's the more you could be prepared. I keep coming back to that. Prepare now and prepare ahead. I keep coming back.
Thank you, Andrew. No, that's awesome. The preparation, that's why we want to have these calls now, because I'm meeting, like you, meeting with some of the churches, and some of the leaders ask the question, well, you know, maybe we need to wait till the end of the year. And while you're talking about the financial side, for me, from the development side, getting through city zoning takes time. Getting plans drawn up takes time. Getting approvals takes time. So we have to make use of those times. So you've heard this idea of being conservative when we put these numbers together, that it's best to overshoot and be able to back up rather than undershoot and have to come back and ask for more. So
I will, I did want to touch, you brought up a very good point, FA. I have a church, one of the churches that I actually started this process in, May. And the title work, we typically do not order outside third parties because they want their money. Attorneys want to get paid for doing their work. So we have to go through the cash flow. We have to make sure everything is done. And these larger complex deals, it takes time to get that stuff done. Well, now during COVID, government offices are shut down. Normally, title work comes back. With one of my attorneys I use here in Columbia, she's very good at getting back my title work in no more than a week. We have been waiting on title work, and we just got it, and it took 3 months because of COVID. The Register of Deeds office, I don't know about Greenville specifically, but I do know in Richland County, Lexington County, and Charleston, they're only open 1 day a week. You have to make an appointment, and you literally get, like, I mean, I believe my abstractor was allowed an hour, and that was it, because other people had other appointments. For permits, exactly the same thing is happening right now, is planning that stage up front, because the government offices being closed or the limited hours that they're using right now. We need to go ahead and do that planning now, because it's going to be a lot longer process for those things that normally don't take as long. You don't even think about that. But I just wanted to interject that one piece.
thank you. I appreciate that. And we're closing. We're right at an hour, just a little bit, slightly after an hour now. So I want to make sure that we get to talk a little bit more about some of the current resources. Tammy had some information on some of the resources that Community Works is mobilizing right now to make available. So I certainly want to give a few minutes there, and then make sure that if there are any other questions that come up that haven't been asked, that we make sure that we give an opportunity to ask those questions. So Tammy, I don't know if you can maybe touch a little bit about on what you all are doing, some of the new programs that you all have out right now that might respond, and we can address that, please.
Sure, and you can share. I think I've got a slide there. So first, you want to go to the next slide. And I know James probably has some stuff to share as well. I know they've been working on some products and some programs to not only support their existing borrowers, but also supporting new borrowers. One of the things, the first thing that we did was, I think I mentioned when COVID hit and we kind of had the stay-at-home orders and some of the shutdowns and closings, is we certainly look to work with our existing borrowers to do some deferments and some loan modifications. So one was to stabilize existing clients. And then many folks on the call were familiar with the federal programs that came down from the CARES Act. One was the EIDL loan, which was the economic injury disaster loan. And so I know both myself and James at South Carolina Community Loan Fund and others have been on various calls and education forums to talk about these different programs. And so this is just a snapshot that FA can share with you guys on the difference between the two programs. Again, the EIDL loan was meant to, and it was direct through SBA, so you didn't have to go through a bank or through a CDFI like us to apply for these funds. But the goal of that was this impacts related to COVID, so loss of revenue associated with the impacts of COVID. And so it wasn't just for payroll, but it was for other costs associated. But this was a true loan, although there was a forgivable portion of the loan, depending on how many employees you had. The goal was that you could access some resources to kind of shore up your expenses and help you during this time. And then 2.7% interest if you were a non-for-profit and 3.75% interest if you were a business. That was direct through SBA. I know some folks have been able to access that, and some actually were not interested. And I know sometimes loans for nonprofits are a little bit scary, and so some folks did not want to look at that when the Paycheck Protection Program was available. Then the Paycheck Protection Program is a program under the SBA, what they call the 7A program. And so only certain banks and certain organizations are eligible to actually apply on your behalf to the Paycheck Protection Program. And again, this was predominantly for you to maintain your employees and hire new employees, or rehire your employees that maybe you had to let go. And it can be forgiven. And so as long as you maintain those employees or bring them back, you can get that resource forgiven. We did work with several churches, so we are working with churches to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program. Some of the experiences in working with churches, which has been challenging, is if you pay your employees via a 1099 or a contract employee, they are not your employee. So some of the churches that have child care centers or that have certain supportive services that they offer, and you hire them as a contractor or a consultant, they are a 1099 employee. And so when churches were coming to us and trying to apply for the Paycheck Protection Program, they could not count those employees. And so now those employees can apply directly as a sole proprietor, as a contractor, but that was something that we faced as an experience with some of our church partners that were looking to apply for this Paycheck Protection Program. So just wanted to let you know that we are actually still accepting paycheck protection applications. We have a little how-to video that FA can send you on how to fill out the paperwork. Currently, the second round of funding has not been depleted, so there is still funding available. I know Synovus has been a good partner. Andrew, I know we've had several nonprofits as well as businesses say that they got their PPP loans through Synovus, so congrats on that as well. I know that South Carolina Community Loan Fund has been sending us referrals on folks. I know you had to be an SBA approved lender under this program, and so some of our CDFI partners were not eligible. So we work together to help each other. So we're working with some of their borrowers where it makes sense. And then we, and James can talk about his program, we are offering was what we call recovery. So our goal is to get businesses to these federal funds first. Number one, those are funds that were not available. We want to make sure you get access to those. But in some cases, organizations will need what we call recovery restart money, which is now your business is opening. Maybe the church is going to reopen, but you have to now make some modifications. We know that you may have to have plastic barriers, you may have to create different seating, you may have to, for your child care centers, you may have some different needs. And so we're going to be offering some different COVID-19 specific products that would be like we were talking about, working capital, additional financial resources. And then I did mention we do, which I know South Carolina Community Loan Fund does not do, but we do work with consumers. And so if you have, and this is predominantly in the upstate, but if you have folks that are looking or to go to these rapid refund places to try to get their $1,200 that the IRS is going to send them, don't make sure that you go to a trusted lender, a trusted partner that can help them. We don't want folks getting 300% interest rates from these payday predatory loans. So we are offering a $1,500 unsecured small dollar emergency loan for families that are struggling as well. And again, that's predominantly in the upstate right now. But these are some things that we're looking at. And again, we have been working with churches on the PPP program, and then these would be products that could be available. And I know, James, you've got some things you're doing if you want to share those.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you so much for that. And thank you guys for the work you're doing. These are some great products for folks to take advantage of. For our part, as South Carolina Community Loan Fund, we, much like Tammy and her team at Community Works, first focused on steadying and assisting our current borrowers through forbearances and interest-only assistance, and now have transitioned to working capital lending, specifically related to those impacted by COVID-19. And we rolled that out to our borrowers a couple of weeks ago, and we will be rolling that out to the public on this Tuesday. So we won't be doing lines of credit through that. We'll be doing term loans of up to $75,000. That's for nonprofit organizations and entities, as well as for-profits as well. I won't bore you with all of the terms on it. I just want to give you a little teaser because we're actually doing a separate webinar this coming Tuesday, May 12th at 1:30, and I will share that information with FA so he can get the link out to everyone. So we invite you all, please ma'am, please sir, to join us, and we'll be covering all the details, terms and conditions at that time, and answer any questions that anyone may have about how you can tap into that resource.
Thank you, James. And thank you, Tammy. I will say this, as we kind of try and wrap up, we've got about 15 minutes left, and we had two more pieces that we wanted to touch on, but I want to make sure we have questions and answers. But, I'm appreciate the fact that Andrew Reinhardt partnered with Pastors Just as Community Loan Fund and Community Works with a goal of putting $10 million in faith-based projects for this year. Certainly when we set that goal, we did not anticipate or know that COVID would have the impact of what it has. But even though we have that commitment and we're looking actively to make that happen, I think that the information that Tammy shared about having unsecured, I had to read that twice and make sure I read that, because that's such a rare entity these days. And so for her to have those types of programs got me excited to be able to say that we look at that. And then the small business piece of it, having our small business owners to be able to have access to those resources, and consumers. So really great things out there, great resources. And part of the goal is that certainly we want to serve the faith-based institutions, but we want our faith-based institutions to be able to articulate these programs and know that they're out there so that we can send the individual business owners in our churches and people who need these resources to get access to them. So before we wrap up, let me just ask James and Tammy, any other concluding comments to sort of wrap things and pull this all together? I know originally, James, we were going to talk a little bit about the loan process from beginning to end. If there are any specific thoughts that you want to share on that, and then Tammy, any other questions or concerns that you want to make sure that people are aware of, and then I'll just make some summary comments.
Sure. In terms of the lending process, from start to finish, I won't cover that blow by blow with you, but just go back to underscore the point that I started the call with, is making sure you have that financial information prepared in the form of those financial statements. That's going to be extremely important as you move forward with your project. One other point that I would mention as well is in terms of moving through the loan process, making sure, to Andrew's earlier point, you provide as much documentation upfront as possible, preferably all of it, because if time is of the essence, and certainly we want to get capital into your hands as quickly as we can, we're going to need that completed application package upfront to prevent those delays on the back end as we're underwriting.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Tammy,
anything? And I'll just add to James on that. What I would say too is, use organizations like James and ourselves, Community Loan Fund and the Community Works. I mean, I mentioned financial wellness and coaching. I mean, one of the things that we have an advantage of that maybe some of the banks don't have quite as much advantages, we do have business coaches. We do have coaches on hand that their sole goal is to work with you, and we're trying to get to a yes. I mean, our goal as a mission-based lender is to get you to a yes. And in many cases, we're partnering with banks like Synovus, and so our money is limited. We don't have as much capital as the banks do. And so in many cases, we can bring other banks to the table and to partner with you. And so, let us use our coaches to help walk you through some of those financials and some of those projects. And then let us maybe say, oh, maybe we bring Synovus in, you need $1 million. Well, we can only do 500, but let me call James and I can get another 500. And that way the risk is spread across all of us as lenders, and we're more willing to maybe do the project. So don't be shy to have multiple lenders in a project, because in many cases that might be the only way that you can get to the yes that you're trying to get to. And then and sort of my little closing, I can't help myself, but you guys as faith organizations and leaders in your communities, advocacy is so important. Advocacy for the people that we serve, for the minority businesses that we're working toward, for the underserved communities, in many cases where your churches may be located, or people that you're serving through your mission. Many of us on this call, James and Andrew and UFA, work on advocacy and making sure we have the resources necessary to address issues like COVID. And, equity is really important to all of our missions. And so I would just say, as you're delivering services and as you're talking with your congregation, that, making sure that we're supporting every corner of South Carolina is super important as we think about organizations like us trying to deliver these services. We need your voices as well.
Thank you, Tammy. As we prepare to move forward, I want to just end with a couple of thoughts from that and ask you all as our participants a couple of questions. Certainly, we've talked a lot about money. We've talked about this session with money. We talked about money as it relates to going to our city and county partners. But I need our faith-based organizations to think about the financial capital as one piece of the puzzle. You as faith-based leaders have a wealth of resources that you have in front of you to help get these projects together. There's social capital. Pastors has been fortunate to work with the entities that you see here: Synovus, the City of Charleston, State Housing, City of Spartanburg, Community Works, and Community Loan Fund to bring this information. But it's the same partnering that we put in place to get these projects done. When we have this layering of resources, we have to reach out to these different entities to get these projects done for the various churches that we serve. So keep in mind that there's social capital, there's political capital. You all as church leaders have the ability to pick up the phone and call your local city council people, local county council people, the local zoning board. So you have those resources. And there's cultural capital. You understand the community. We talk about blocks and from a technical standpoint in terms of real estate, but you understand the dynamics. So don't think that because you're land rich and cash poor that you don't have capital. There's social, political capital as well. There are other elements in terms of what makes you powerful. Andrew touched on, the leadership. He was talking specifically about stewards, but we've been fortunate to work across the denominations. So whether it's the vestry, the steward, and the trustees, the deacons, think about who's represented in those leadership ranks and who can help you get access to the Tammys in your community, the James in your community, the Andrews in your community. How do you reach the Martin Livingstons, the John Shaw Johnsons, and help make those calls? So keep those political elements in mind as a part of that. So we will send out some project information sheets. We'll send out some checklists, and we've made commitments to have individual meetings. We were in the throes of going city by city. We met in Charleston in December, and ended up with about $1.1 million in projects coming out of that. We've closed one of those. We've got two more that are getting ready to close as a part of that. So we wanted to go to this electronic medium in this period of stay at home to reach out and continue to get that word out as we look at putting those together. So we want to get these resources in your hand so that you're equipped and ready to carry on that mission. I will ask you all, this as a question: when we send out this information, please send back if there are topics that we've touched on and you want more information, like the CRA. We made the commitment to bring the CRA information. If there are more things you want to delve deeper in, let us know and email us and let us know what that is. And then what new topics do you think that are important to help you as a faith-based leader to make happen? I made a couple of notes in addition to the CRA. Xavier got me thinking from the legal standpoint. I had been thinking about doing some legal workshops with our faith-based community, and I think we need to go around the state and have this same conversation to make sure that, because I can't tell you how many times we're trying to scramble at closing to get resolutions and get other things filed, or realize that we let our corporate expire because we didn't file the filing with the Secretary of State, and now we technically legally don't exist, so we've got to go file. So all of those different things that we want to have a technical workshop. And I thought about, I saw my friend Lucinta Lewis Ellis on the line, and I said, we need to have conversations because it frustrates me. The first thing our churches want to jump out and do is hire an architect, and they don't know what the costs of the project are. So having some due diligence sessions. So there are other follow-up sessions that I think that would be real fruitful to have to make sure that we are equipped and we have the tools in our tool belt to move forward. So I thank each of the Spark partners that helped put this information together. I will remind, we'll get a written email out as well, but this Tuesday, May 12th, is that James? For your webinar on some of the resources of what you're doing with the working capital. We appreciate your attendance. Or I'm sorry, let me make sure. Well, I cannot, let me check the chat. There are no more questions in the chat. If anyone want to unmute right quick and ask a question before we go our separate ways, please let me know right quick if someone wants to hit unmute and ask a question. All right, if not, I thank you. We appreciate your attendance, and we will see you next time.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you. Oh, we do have one question pop up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
FA, this is Xavier. Can you hear me?
I can.
With the legal workshops, I'll be happy to assist you with those. I'll travel with you. If you need some assistance, just let me know.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. And I will hold you to that. We'll make that happen.
Yes, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye. Reverend King is still there. She's gonna.